We are still here, telling Michigan stories. Even without federal funding, we're not going anywhere because public service doesn't stop. No matter what, we are here for you. Stand with us today. michiganpublic.org/donate. From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I am Zoe Clark. Rick Pluta is out on assignment. On today's show, results from Detroit's mayoral primary.
So yes, Detroit, we've made so much progress, but so much work is ahead of us.
City Council President Mary Sheffield there, the top vote getter from Tuesday's election. She will face Pastor Solomon Kinloch in November.
Detroit needs more than a manager of downtown development. We need moral leadership.
Stephen Henderson, host of American Black Journal on Detroit PBS, is here to fill us in on the results and what they mean for the city's future. Stephen, hi.
Hey, how are you?
So let's start by setting the table. The top two vote getters move on to the November general election. But Stephen, the percentage of the vote that Mary Sheffield received was surprising. Fill us in.
Yeah, so I think most of us in Detroit were coming into Election Day with our eyes pretty keenly focused on second place in this race. I mean, I think everyone understood that Mary Sheffield, according to the polls at least, and the momentum that people feel, was going to get the first place vote. She was going to get the most votes. But there was a real question about who would come in second. And so I think we all expected to be looking more closely at that race throughout the night. But when the first results were released, not too late after the polls closed, another story emerged. And it was that Sheffield, in a field of 9 candidates, had more than half the vote. And as we got deeper into the night and vote totals continued to come in, it was also clear that if you added up all the other candidates' votes, all 8 other candidates' votes, she still was getting more votes than they did, which is, of course, how you get to 50%. And so at the end of the night, the gap between her vote total and Solomon Kinloch's, I believe, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 27 or 28 points. The other campaigns in this race had all sort of said they wanted to keep it as tight as they could on election night to seem as though, look, there's a race going into the fall. I don't know how you spin that this day after the election. That's an incredible amount to make up in 12 weeks. And I actually did a little research. There is a 3.5% probability based on past races with 9 candidates anywhere in the country of one candidate coming out with 50% or more of the vote. And so we're talking about an almost unprecedented kind of win for Mary Sheffield.
What's behind Sheffield doing so well?
So I have said throughout this campaign that it's really hard to understand exactly what's going on. I think, Detroiters have a number of things weighing on their minds right now. And one of them is, of course, disillusionment at what they feel is the lack of progress in their lives based on what politicians do. I do think there's a lot of energy for Mary Sheffield. She has been campaigning for 2 years for this position. That's a long time. She's the most established candidate in the race. I also feel as though the other candidates, and in particular Solomon Kinloch, who did come in second, and Santil Jenkins, who came in third, never quite connected with people in the same way. I'm rather surprised, frankly, by Solomon Kinloch's vote total. He is the pastor of a church here in the city that has some 40,000 congregants. Now, many of them don't live in the city, but almost all of them were out talking to people in the city about their pastor and how excited they were that he was on the ballot. He ended up with just over 11,000 votes. Nowhere near the support that we thought he would get. Santil Jenkins is also a pretty familiar name in the city of Detroit. She used to be the city council president and has run a nonprofit in the city for 10 years, a very popular nonprofit. Um, she didn't seem to be able to get traction either. And I don't know whether it's about people not getting the answers that they want about the city's future and its problems and how they would address them, or whether it is about not feeling that personal connection. Detroiters are very keen on the idea of attaching to candidates and being about them in more than a political sense. And I think, I surmise at least, that was the failure that Kinloch and Jenkins were suffering. And Mary, spent 2 years cultivating that kind of connection.
Well, Stephen, let's talk about voters. We got to talk about turnout. Yes, this is an off-year election. Yes, it's a primary. But I know you have been thinking a lot about turnout in the city during these elections, the percentage of turnout, and who gets to determine the future of Detroit.
Yeah. So, we don't have a great turnout record in Detroit, especially for these elections, which are, as you point out, off year. We do a little better when there's a presidential election or a gubernatorial election, but when it's just municipals, more people stay home. This year, I think there was some reasonable expectation because we had 9 candidates on the ballot, and many of them, many of them, were appealing to people in different ways. If you look at just the experience and credentials of the candidates in this field, they're far more significant than what we have seen in recent mayoral elections, where there's been one person on the ballot, Mike Duggan, who people are very enthusiastic about, and then somebody that they just don't even want to consider. We thought more people would show up, and I want to say something else about this cycle in Detroit. I've been covering, elections and politics for more than 30 years now, not just in Detroit, but in other cities as well. I have never seen a cycle where there were more opportunities for potential voters to see the candidates, to hear from them, and to interact with them. There were several weeks during this cycle where there was a forum almost every day, and multiple candidates showing up to those forums to talk about their ideas in the city and the race. I thought that signaled an enthusiasm for the vote. I figured that with that many organizations focused on getting people access to the candidates, more people would get it and would feel like, hey, I saw this person or I heard this person at this event, and they won my vote. I don't think we know enough about the disconnect there, like why that doesn't make a difference. There were so many things about this race that seem to be able to pull more people to the polls, and in the end, they really didn't. And it's easy, I think, to say that this is somebody's fault or the fault of one factor. I think it's a much more complicated picture than most of us are generally thinking that it is. And I think what happened this week in Detroit is a lesson for us about more attention we need to pay to this, and to figure out what it is that keeps people from exercising their right to vote and making their voice heard in these elections.
Yeah, well, we will be watching, of course, this race now over the next 3 months, heading into the November general election. This race between City Council President Mary Sheffield and Pastor Solomon Kinloch, taking over after 12 years of Mike Duggan. Stephen Henderson, host of American Black Journal on Detroit PBS, and guest hosting stateside over the past few weeks here on Michigan Public. It's been fun to hear your voice, and thank you for this Detroit mayoral primary debrief.
Absolutely. And a couple other primary results from across the state.
In Lansing, current Mayor Andy Shore will be on the November ballot once again. He is running for a third term. Shore finished at the top of the city's mayoral primary on Tuesday. He will go up against nonprofit director Kelsey Hector, who won the second spot on the November ballot. And in Ann Arbor, the fate of a hotly contested property downtown has now been settled. On Tuesday, nearly 60% of voters approved a measure to transfer the property's development rights from the city to the Ann Arbor District Library. The library says it will build a high-rise containing a new library plus housing and set aside part of the land for a public plaza. Well, let's continue to stay local with some interesting new data. More than half of local officials in Michigan think the state is on the wrong track. That's according to the new Michigan Public Policy Survey conducted by the University of Michigan's Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy. Deborah Horner is Senior Program Manager at U of M's Ford School of Public Policy. Deborah, hi.
Hi, Zoe. How are you doing?
I'm good. So, Deborah, first off, what did you find?
So this is a survey that we do every year. This is an annual survey that goes all the way back to 2009. So we ask these questions of local government leaders across the state every year, questions about whether they think the state is going in the right direction or if it is off on the wrong track, and then some other assessments about what's going on in the state. And so over time, we've seen ups and downs on this assessment of where the state's going. And this year, as you said, about half of our local government officials in our counties, cities, villages, and townships across the state think we're off on the wrong track. On the other hand, about 32% think we're going in the right direction. And then there's a lot of uncertainty among our local officials. About 17% of them say, we're just not sure how the state's going and what direction it's headed.
Well, let's dig into that 17% because that is an increase, kind of a big increase. What do you make of that?
Well, this survey was taken during April and May of this year, of 2025. And I think all of this year has been a lot of uncertainty on a variety of levels, policy levels, economic levels, and the direction the economy is taking. And so I think that that large number of people who are saying, where are we headed as a state, saying they're not sure, comes from a lot of this uncertainty about what's happening at the federal level and at the state level, and then also within local economies.
I think it's really important, though, to note here, Deborah, that the majority of the folks who took this survey were Republican local officials, 2/3, then 20% Democrats, 17% independents. Can we assume that folks simply divide themselves among party lines, meaning if Republicans are in charge, the state is on the right track, and if Democrats are, vice versa?
That is certainly something we've seen over the years. Again, we've done this survey since Jennifer Granholm was governor, and then throughout the Governor Snyder years, and now throughout the Whitmer years. And certainly, we have seen Republicans being much more optimistic about the state when there is a Republican governor, and vice versa with Democrats under Gretchen Whitmer. So yes, there's a real partisan bent to this assessment. Interestingly, there's a little bit of effect to whether President Biden or President Trump is in charge at the federal level, but it's much more dominated. And also some differences on whether who's in control of the legislature. So we see some sensitivity to that among local government officials and their assessments. But boy, it's really driven by the governor's leadership and who's got control of the executive here in Michigan.
What does that tell you then about local officials here in the state?
So what I think they see is that the governor does have a lot of control over some of the policy making that's really directed at local governments. Some of obviously the revenue sharing and the budgeting, some of the policy right now around sustainability and energy, a lot of the policy around other kinds of regulation that's coming down at the state level that controls how local governments can make decisions on their own. And so I think that even though the legislature obviously plays a role in that, I think they really look to the governor's policy making here in Michigan as to how they feel they're going to be able to have quality of life in the state and in their communities as well.
You talk about this survey as sort of being, Deborah, a vibe survey, this vibes of how local officials feel. I'm curious, we've talked a lot on the program about divided government here in Michigan and the lack of a budget, for example. Is that where some of this vibe may be coming from?
I don't know. Honestly, this year saw actually some positive movement among independents and Republicans about the direction the state's going, and some decline among Democrats. We saw a little bit of a convergence. And I think that the divided government is not necessarily seen as a bad thing among locals, at least among kind of local government Republicans and independents who saw the switch to the House being controlled by Republicans. So I think there is concern about the budget among local officials, but I think they also, given that so many of our local officials do self-identify as Republicans, I think they were pretty happy to see the divided government come into play here in Michigan. So remember, lots of our local officials around the state are in small rural communities that tend to be dominated by the Republican Party. And so we're seeing in our survey, we're looking at all of those people, not just in the main population centers. And so we're seeing a lot of sentiment on the ground directed by Republican local leaders.
Deborah, did anything else stand out to you in these survey results this year?
One of the things that was just really somewhat surprising to me, although it has been a trend over the past 4 or 5 years, is just how stable Governor Whitmer's assessments are among all three types of partisans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. That she, despite all of the things that have happened in the state since 2020 and post-COVID, her assessments among Democrats have remained really stable, among independents have remained really stable, and among Republicans have remained really stable. Whereas for Governor Schneider, there was just much more volatility among the different partisan groups, and similar volatility that they kind of tracked each other on his performance. Governor Whitmer really has kind of just had this very stable set of assessments that has kind of surprised me, given all of the highs and lows of Michigan politics over the past 5 years.
Deborah, finally, I am thinking about next year, speaking of highs and lows, when the state is going to go through just a historic election year, a large number of open statewide seats, plus the entire state House, the Senate, Michigan's entire U.S. congressional delegation is up for election. Ballot proposals. What do you think local officials are watching for in terms of stability or uncertainty in an upcoming election year that really may be unlike anything we've seen before?
Well, I think local government officials have their eye on, with uncertainty and not sure what's coming down the pike, the end of a lot of funding that came out of the federal government over the past few years. Local governments saw funding from the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, from the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, and then a lot of other kind of federal funding that was available to them for things like housing or transportation or other kinds of programming, kind of long-term programming. Lots of those funds are now going to start to wrap up. These are anticipated endings to those, some of them are not, but it's not really clear what's going to happen to local government finances because of that. And I think that local government officials are very much looking out into the future and not seeing a lot of clarity. And so I think that they are very much going into this next round of big policy changes that's going to come in 26 with a lot of concern and uncertainty.
That is Deborah Horner. She is Senior Program Manager at the University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy, bringing us the latest results from the new Michigan Public Policy Survey conducted by the University of Michigan Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy. Deborah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark. Rick Pluta will really be back next week. Let's talk then.